Yeah,
Yeah,
we can. Yeah.
great. Okay. Good evening, gents and ladies. This is talk I prepared for the Pool Radio Society a couple of years ago. Back in April 2018, I decided to take myself off to the Isles of Scilly for a mini DXpedition. I'd never done anything like it before in my life. So it was sort of all very new. I'd seen people go off to these exotic places. You might have seen Don Field's talk a couple of 3 weeks ago, where he'd sort of been all around the world, operating from really luxurious DX places. And I thought, well, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot of lessons. I don't really need to go halfway around the world to learn them. Somewhere not too far away will be perfectly adequate for the job. And I'd never been to the Isles of Scilly, so I thought, I quite fancy going there sometime, and it seemed like a good idea. So that's why I ended up going to the Isles of Scilly. Somewhere, yeah. So, bit of background: why the Isles of Scilly? Where are they? And then I'll look at how I got there. A little diary that I kept, just to sort of things that I noted, things I learned as I went along. Then a sort of some lessons learned and issues, and then finally a look around St Mary's, which is the main island there. Because I didn't operate all the time, it was only me, so it was very much a single operator. So I needed to go out and get food, and I wanted to have a look around a bit. So it wasn't 100% DXpedition, but it was good fun. So why choose the Isles of Scilly? Well, I looked for something that would, from a radio point of view, be a little bit rare, but not too far to travel. As far as I could establish, there are only 2 amateurs in the call book at the time, one of whom, as far as I could ascertain, was non-resident. So I wasn't likely to be, if you like, competing or taking a lot of pleasure away from lots of other amateurs by going and operating there. It's got a rare locator, India November 96, India November 69. There's not many people have worked that locator, and in 2018, the American ARRL people, the RSGB equivalent over there, had their international grid chase. So basically, there was sort of a scheme for competition, if you like, for making contacts with as many different locator squares as you can on the HF bands, which is a bit different. We're used to that on the VHF bands, but on the HF bands, I think it was sort of almost unique. So when I was researching this in sort of February, March time, as far as I could see, nobody had uploaded any contacts into Logbook of the World, which was the mechanism by which the grid chase scheme operated. Nobody had uploaded a single contact from India November 69. So I thought, right, well, that should make it at least a bit attractive to some. It's also, the Isles of Scilly are also a separate island for islands on the air purposes. So I thought, well, that should be a little bit interesting. And I did a bit more digging around, and the Worldwide Flora and Fauna Award scheme showed that there's been no previous logs submitted for the Isles of Scilly, because the whole of the Isles of Scilly is an area of outstanding beauty. So I thought, well, that's 3 things at least that make it moderately attractive, at least, to quite a few radio amateurs, not only in the UK, but outside the UK, worldwide. So I thought, well, that seems to, meet my criteria of somewhere I could get to, not too far to travel, and so on. So where are the Isles of Scilly? Well, basically, it's an archipelago of 9 inhabited islands, plus lots of tiny little rocky islets, about 28 miles, 45 kilometers off the end of the Land's End off southwest of Cornwall. Now that 140, depends on what the tide's like. At low tide, I suspect there's more. At high tide, there's probably more. At high tide, there may be less. But I read somewhere it was 140, and that seemed to be a reasonable number to quote. So basically, there are 5 populated islands. St Mary's, the largest, which is where I stayed, got a population of 1,666 when I did the research. St Martin's in red to the north, got a population of 142. St Agnes to the southwest in orange is got 73. Tresco in green there has got 180, famous for some gardens if you're into gardening. And Braher has got 92, even further to the northwest. And all the little grey blobs you can maybe see on the slide there are all the uninhabited ones. Now you can do day trips to some of the uninhabited ones, and you can do day trips to, and there are ferries that go between these various islands. So one of the first questions I had to ask myself was, well, where am I going to base myself? And I'll come on to that in a moment. Worked all Britain areas. Most of St Mary's is Sugar Victor 91. And all of the Isles of Scilly are comfortably in India November 69 from a Maidenhead locator point of view. So how did I get there? Well, I decided I would go to St Mary's, that's the big island in yellow there, because basically it felt less risky. There was less time travelling both ways. If there was weather-related delays, there'd be less chance of me being marooned on one of the smaller islands. And it also gave me a better chance of getting any tools or anything that I'd forgotten. And all the flights and ferries from the mainland arrive at St Mary's. And the local ferries to the inhabited islands are subject to tides and weather. So all in all, it seemed to make sense to aim for St Mary's, which is what I did. Now, how do you get to the Scilly Isles? Well, basically, you can get a ferry. There's a daily ferry from Penzance. It operates basically spring through to autumn, but not during the winter. It leaves 9:45 in the morning, so that would have meant an overnight stay in Penzance for me, because I live in Poole. Penzance is, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours away by road and even longer by train. And the ferry gets back in 7:15 in the evening. So again, we're looking at either an incredibly late home time or another overnight stay. So 2 overnight stays would have cost. And I figured, well, actually, that doesn't seem to make a huge amount of sense. I'd sooner have an extra couple of days operating, thank you. But what clinched it was a quote I saw somewhere describing the ferry journey as like a great white stomach pump. And bearing in mind I was going in April, I figured that I'm not going to take too many chances. I really don't fancy turning up there having had a bout of seasickness. And whilst it might be okay one way, I've got to come back and vice versa. So in the end, I decided I'd go by air. And broadly, there's 3 routes you can go by air. You can travel from Exeter Airport, which takes about an hour. Newquay Airport from the North Cornish coast takes about 30 minutes. Or you can go from Land's End Airport, which takes about 20 minutes. Well, I decided to fly from Exeter because I was coming from Poole in Dorset, and it would actually take me longer to get to Newquay and a lot longer than another hour to get from Exeter to Newquay or Land's End. So I figured that Exeter Airport was the better option. Now, if you're traveling by air to the Isles of Scilly, you've got some serious constraints to consider. Your baggage is limited not only by weight, but by size. It's a lot less than other carriers. And I actually phoned ahead to check that my main case was okay, and it was just. They also have a fairly low limit of checked-in baggage of 15 kilos. Now, if you could fly with British Airways, for example, elsewhere, typically it's 23 kilos. And even your carry-on baggage, you're limited to 3 kilos. So basically, unless I wanted to pay an excess, which could have added another 50 quid to take it up, take my 15 kilos up to 20 kilos, I was looking at a DXpedition, broadly keeping within 18 kilos. So I weighed everything. I weighed pens, I weighed underwear, I weighed toothpaste, anything that I could do to minimize the weight, I did. And by shaving a few grams here, a few grams there, a week's worth of underwear, that's saving me 100 grams plus. Half empty toothpaste tube, 50 grams, there's another 50 grams. Lots of little things sort of added up to probably half a kilo, maybe a bit more. And on the plane, because I didn't want to have it weighed, I wore a thick jumper, a fleece and an anorak on the plane for weight reasons. So, all the heavy clothing I was wearing on the plane. Now, when it came to equipment, I needed, basically I was choosing equipment almost by weight alone. I borrowed from the Pool Radio Society, which I'm a member, an FT857 transceiver with its DC lead, and that weighed in at 2.10 kilos. The microphone was another 170 grams, power supply 1.5 kilos. And you can see there just all the little things that add up. And basically, if you like, the radio station was going to come in at just under 9 kilos. Although I was able to, I did take the laptop charger and mouse as hand luggage. Again, even with the hand luggage, you're limited to a very small size. If I'd taken a sort of a conventional modern laptop with sort of 15, 16 inch screens, I don't think I'd have been able to I think I would have exceeded the size limit. And I took my Heil headphone and boom microphone arrangement and a foot switch, because that's the way I like to operate, giving me hands-free for logging purposes. And whilst I do log mainly on the computer these days, I wanted to take paper logs and pen just in case the computer packed up on me. To sort of go all that way and not be able to log seemed it seemed a reasonable precaution to at least have a pen and paper to log with. So basically, that was the setup. The just to sort of, if I go around from top left clockwise to bottom left. So we've got the FT857 top left, the switch mode power supply, which I'll come on to talk about a little bit later on. And then on the right, the green bag is one of these SOTA beams link dipoles, which gave me 80, 40, 80, 40, 20, and what other band was it? 80, oh, and 30. So I've got 20, 30, 40 and 80 meters with one of these linked dipoles. And because they're linked dipoles, they're resonant, I didn't need an ATU. On that grey thing is one of the SOTA beam telescopic poles. The black, then to the left of that is the Heil headphones and microphone. And then over to the left below the power supply is the foot switch and my data interface, which is a homemade one. And the adapter leads, and then in the plastic bag was just a bag of useful things that I knew I was going to need, but I didn't know quite how much of what I'd need. It's got some string, it's got cable ties, it's got some guy hooks to stick in the ground. Because I'd not been on site before, I didn't know precisely what I was going to be met with, so I needed to have some flexibility to cater for the unexpected. So back to the weight. The suitcase was best part of 3 kilo. Clothing, excluding the stuff I was going to wear, came in at just under 2 kilos. Then there was toiletries. And one of my colleagues at the club suggested, you need some tools. You know, what are you going to do if something goes wrong? And my initial feeling was I wasn't going to take any tools. He said, you know, you really ought to take something. You know, I thought, well, what am I going to take? In the end, I went down to a local hardware store here and bought a little copy of a Swiss Army knife, weighed in at about 130 grams. And I'm really, really pleased he suggested that, and we'll see why shortly. I took some maps, some guidebooks and manuals for the radio because I'd not used an FT857 before. I did try it out at home beforehand, but I wasn't familiar with the rig, so it wasn't like using a rig that I was used to using. I also, as an optional thing, I also took a 6-meter wire dipole, a 4-meter wire dipole, and a 4-meter transverter, with the view of perhaps operating in one of the RSGB 4-meter contests and one of their 6-meter contests. More on that shortly. I also took sort of an extension feeder lead. That was optional from my perspective, but I just sort of had a thought, well, what if the feeder that's attached to that band to the antenna isn't long enough? So I, rightly or wrongly, took another, allowed myself the luxury of 630 grams of extension feeder. And I took a small camera in my hand luggage, and there was various other things. But in total, it came to about 17 kilos. Obviously, the heavy clothing wasn't actually checked in, nor was the camera. So I reckoned I was very close to the 15 kilo mark. Now, those are the sort of optional extras as I saw it. And as I said, the Swiss Army knife turned out to be invaluable. Just out of interest, in researching this, I looked around at transceivers to see what was available and what they weighed. And it's not the sort of parameter that we're used to considering as radio amateurs. Weight is not normally our prime criteria for selecting a transceiver. And it turned out that the club's FT857 was the lightest 100-watt HF transceiver that was available, or I could discover existed. So I'm quite glad, that the club had this FT857 that I could borrow. So how did I get there? Well, I wasn't driving, so I got the train to Exeter, and from Poole here on the south coast, I had to go in rather a convoluted route, thanks to Dr. Beeching. I have to travel to Southampton, then up to Salisbury, and then from Salisbury down to Exeter. The train, as is so often the case, was late. So I ended up having to get a taxi from Exeter St David's station up to the airport. Then flying from Exeter airport to St Mary's. Then finally on the Isles of Scilly, I got a taxi from St Mary's airport to the accommodation, which I'd pre-booked. And that was only, what, £4 one way. So not exactly going to break the bank. The aircraft from Exeter, it's a DHC Twin Otter. It's got a capacity of 17 passengers and has 2 crew. That day I was the only passenger on it. I actually had to sort of keep knocking on doors at the airport to find somebody to check me in, because I was literally the only passenger flying. And the safety briefing, because the plane's quite small inside, it's not big enough for the flight attendant to come up and do all their, this is where the front doors are, this is where the back doors, this is how you fasten your seatbelt. So you actually do it in the terminal. And they said to me, well, are you happy to walk out to the plane? I said, yeah, quite happy. Now I'm checked in and the main case has gone. As long as you tell me which plane to walk out to. Somebody escorted me to the plane, and I don't know, 200 or 300 yards walk. I was quite glad of the walk after the train, to be honest. So where did I stay? Well, I actually stayed in a sort of commercial cottage that's let out by a family there. It's actually a pair of cottages, semi-detached cottages called Shamrock Cottages, and it's very roughly in the middle of the island. Now, I sort of did a bit of research. I actually contacted 1 or 2 groups that had operated from the Isles of Scilly for contests on, I think, a bigger DXpedition some years previously. But the one thing that was very clear from the photos they showed me was that the distance from where they were operating to where they had got their antennas was quite considerable. And I really didn't want to couldn't afford the wait for a really, really long feeder run. So when I saw these Shamrock Cottages and the fact that there was a sort of a balcony area just outside the main door that I could potentially clamp my pole to, it felt like I was in the position where I could be using quite short feeder runs and not have to worry about taking too much additional feeder. So I rang them up, and having had a look on the internet, it's close to the highest point, and I phoned them up just to confirm that it would be okay to operate before booking. And as I said, there were 2 chalets, semi-detached. One of them wasn't occupied during my stay. It looked as though they were probably doing some renovation or paint work or something like that on it. So that was good. There was a cafe just up the road. We'll come to that in a minute. And it's also on the round the island bus route, which I thought, great. It's sort of making it quite an attractive proposition. It means I can get to the shops, I can get food if I need to, I can go and get a meal if I want to locally, and I can operate 24 hours a day, not have to worry about disturbing the people who might have otherwise been staying in the other half. So it seemed to tick all the boxes. And it was away from the main town, Hugh-town, where I sensed, it was fairly close together, lots of accommodation, but I sensed, there might be, problems, EMC issues and things like that. So I thought, if I stay out of town, that will at least minimise those sorts of problems. So it's a self-catering chalet, modern comforts, quite solid, reasonably speedy Wi-Fi. BT had put in a microwave link for Wi-Fi. No, they put in a cable, sorry, from the mainland a few years ago, and the Wi-Fi was absolutely rock solid, perfectly adequate speed, and I was able to operate any time of the day or night. Mains electricity, just needed £1 or £2 coins into the meter, plenty of main sockets. Just one thing, there's no mains gas on the island, so if I needed any heat, I had to plug in electric heaters. And for each of the chalets, there were 2 bedrooms, each with a single and double bed, well-appointed kitchen and bathroom, lounge dining area with a table and chairs for 6 people, a decked area with a small table and seat, railings that I could cable tie my SOTA pole to, a large grass area outside, and trees on both sides of the grass where I could tie off my wire antenna. So it felt like, I was in business. There's the kitchen. It's certainly bigger than my kitchen at home. Had everything I needed and more. That's one of the 2 bedrooms. Absolutely fine. I'll mention now, you may notice there's 2 bedside lamps there. I'll talk about those later. And my operating position was the dining room table, and that's sort of a typical shot of the setup. Transceiver with headphones, little laptop, looks like I was running FT8 at the time that was taken, mug with me coffee in, and over on the right there was a CD player and a glass vase. Well, I couldn't afford the luxury of CDs or anything. I think I did take an MP3. I think I took my iPod with me to give a bit of entertainment. There was also television in there, so, and as I say, fast enough access to the internet, so I wasn't short of entertainment. And this is a rough plan, not to scale, but it's moderately accurate, I think. Gives you a feel for the setup. The grass area was a decent size, and that's the way I could fit in an 80-meter dipole. So I had to dogleg one side, but not the other. And it worked for me. And that's what it looked like. There's my SOTA pole, and you may just be able to discern the wired dipole strung out as an inverted V. It got quite windy on occasions, so I was quite glad that I didn't put the dipole up to the very top of the SOTA pole. And I just cable tied it to the railing. I'm a great advocate of cable ties for portable operations. I won't go anywhere without a good supply of cable ties. I use the reusable ones so that I can disconnect them and reuse them. And that was the Feedpoint. So it's one of the SOTA pole, SOTA beam dipoles where you just crop clip different sections together to get you progressively longer wavelengths. I've used several of theirs and I think they're excellent. Really good. I've taken them about 4 DXCC now. Not for serious operating, to be fair, but no, I find them excellent. And just down the road was this Bavarian cafe house. And they do, you know, chicken and vegetable stew. So I thought, great, you know, that's a, you know, a lunch or two. They do it nice, but they did very nice ham salads, German wine and beer, great. Apple strudel. The only disadvantage was they're only open from 11 till 5, so I couldn't have my evening meal there, but at least I could have my lunch there. And you know, it made a pleasant break, and it didn't take long to get there or long to get back, so I wasn't taking a lot of time out of my operating time. Contests, those are the main SSB and data mode contests that were scheduled for during my stay. I wasn't anticipating participating in contests as sort of the main focus of my operation, but I wanted to be at least aware of what was on. I'm not a CW operator, so if there were any CW contests on, I wouldn't have bothered noting them. But I could see that there was that French PSK one on the first weekend, likewise a Czech-Slovak SSB contest. And then on the Sunday afternoon, after those had finished, there was a Worked All Britain PSK 63 in Ritty. I thought, well, that could be interesting. And then on the Sunday morning, there was an RSGB 6 metre contest, and on the Thursday evening, there was an RSGB 4 metre contest. So I thought, well, you know, I've got a variety of contests there I could participate in if I want. So what I did was I actually kept a little diary, and I literally did this as I was there. So Saturday was mainly travelling. Only 2 passengers. I was the only passenger on the plane, plus the 2 crew. My actual luggage weighed in at 17 kilos, but they didn't charge me. Paulgers, the taxi people, picked me up and took me to the door for £4. And as soon as I got there, I got set up on HF, and I made some SSB contacts on 40 metres, mainly in the Czech and Slovak contest. I then walked into town to get some food and shopping, because I'd brought absolutely nothing. I couldn't afford the wait, so I'd got, you know, I hadn't got any bread, butter, milk, cereal, nothing. So I figured, you know, I needed to get some food, some sustenance. And when I got back, I did a bit of on FT8, and then the power supply unit stopped working. I thought, oh dear. And I thought, I was getting tired by then, so I thought, stop, I'm going to leave it in the morning. I'm not going to try and fix it this evening when I'm tired. So Sunday morning, I caught up with my computer logging. What I'd done, to get myself started quickly, I'd not bothered with the computer log. I'd just done some paper logging. But I thought, okay, let's get those contacts into the computer log, and I uploaded those logs. The power supply problem turned out to be the main switch. Before I went, I'd been switching the power supply on and off with the main switch, and it was arcing quite badly. And after it failed, there was no arcing. So it gave me a bit of a clue that perhaps that main switch had failed. So I actually sacrificed a bit of my 4 metre dipole wire to bodge, to sort of bypass the main switch. I don't think the electricians, you know, would have passed any electrical safety test, but at least it got me back on the air. And I did some more on FT8 then. Had rain, more, and then it stopped raining. And I lowered the pole and added my 6 metre dipole to the top. And I switched on 6 metres to see if I could hear the Cornish beacon. Well, I could, but it was a bit weak. And I couldn't hear any activity in the RSGB 6-meter contest. Now, to be fair, I doubt if many people would have pointed their beams in the direction of the Isles of Scilly, not knowing that I was on. But I did have a listen around. So I went back and did some more PSK on 20 meters. And then went back to 40 meters for some FT8, bit of RITI, and did the and some PSK to do the Worked All Britain data contest. Back onto 30 meters. Then I thought, I think I fancy some grub. So late afternoon, I walked up to the cafe and found the Apple Strudel Cafe and had a lovely salad, I think, and then back to base and some more 30-meter contacts. My first contact across the Atlantic. Also noticed that I'd got my first logbook of the world confirmations coming through. So all in all, not a bad day. And in the evening, some horrendous QRM came up on 30 meters. And I thought, oh, there's no point in struggling. Let's give in for the day and see if it's still there in the morning. So there's my first logbook of the world confirmation. Anyway, Monday, yeah, I got my first some more contacts confirmed. My first EQSL had arrived, and I uploaded Sunday's logs, another 10 logbook of the world confirmations, and I stayed on 30 meters on FT8. And again, I wanted a break, so I thought, well, I'll walk into town, and I stopped off in a cafe on the way, not the Apple Strudel one, a different one, for some lunch. And I caught the community bus back. I'll come onto the community bus later. And then I got back to 30 meters FT8 until it was getting dark and swapped onto 40 meters for some PSK. And they were forecasting 50-mile-an-hour winds overnight. And that was not helping the SWR. I could see the antenna blowing around in the wind. Tuesday's ferry was cancelled. The planes were in doubt, you know, it was whether they were going to be flying. You know, it's sort of, I'm marooned on an island. And when that happens to you for the first time, it's sort of, oh, I can't get home. You know, if anything seriously happens to me, I'm going to be reliant on the little hospital in Hewtown. You know, it made me sort of realise what island life is like for the residents. And I also checked, and I was starting to get contacts confirmed for the ARRL grid challenge. So I knew what I was doing was actually helping people. So Tuesday morning, I had an early start. The antenna survived the storm, but the antenna wire itself got hooked up behind the gutter clips of the chalet. So I had to get a chair out, climb up on it, and just managed to reach to free it. Uploaded Monday's logs and did various data modes on 40 meters. Wind still blowing the antenna. Sometimes I could look out of the window and see the antenna. Sometimes I couldn't, as the wind blown it completely out of sight. And I thought, well, I probably need to do a little bit of publicity now. So I put my activity onto the Worldwide Flora and Flora website, and the winds eased off, and I made some more PSK contacts and FT8 contacts, including Cuba. So I thought, oh, this is nice. Yeah, we're getting there. Wednesday was World Amateur Radio Day. So I had a really early start, 2 o'clock in the morning UTC. Couldn't get through the big guns that were on 40 meters on the east coast of the States. So I thought, okay, well, I'll upload Tuesday's logs. And by that stage, I'd worked 47 DXCCs. So I thought, that's not bad. Yeah, quite happy with that. By 8 o'clock clock time, it was sunny, blue skies, wind at ease. So this was good news. So I thought, time for a new band. So I moved from 40 meters to 30 meters. Again, put myself on the worldwide Flora and Flora website. Spent a morning on 30 meters. And after lunch, I set up for 40 meters. So I had to go out, change the clips on the antenna because I'd got a sked with one of the local amateurs here in Dorset on PSK 31. Tried, didn't work. I think we were probably just too close. We were in the skip zone. And then I set up for 80 meters. Now, this is the first time I've ever operated on 80 meters with a half-wave dipole. At home, I can just fit in a 20-meter dipole. If I want to operate on 40, I have to use loading coils and end up with a horizontal V with the angle between the two wires either side probably 30, 40 degrees, something like that. So far from ideal, and 80 is just not worth trying. So it was really nice to get on 80 meters for the first time with a half decent antenna. Okay, the ends of the 80 meter dipole are only 2 meters above the ground, but at least I was making contacts on various data modes. So it felt like I was making progress. Thursday, grey and windless, continued on FT8 on 80 meters, even got a sort of pile up. I had 3 QSOs across to the States on 80 meters and gave a French station a new band for him on 80 meters. He'd not worked G on 80 meters, so he was pleased. And I had in the back of my mind maybe to have a go on the 4 meter contest in the evening. I joined in my first 80 meter net. One of the guys at the pool club is a member of the Royal Signals Amateur Radio Society, and invited me to join their 80 meter net. So I joined in on that. If I'm honest, I'm not a great net lover, but it was very pleasant to do that, and it made a nice change. So after that, I switched over to 20 meters, and it seemed pretty slow going on PSK and 63. And again, even moving to FT8, it was still rather slow. So the weather improved in the afternoon. So I tried getting set up for 4 meters. The Cornish beacon in St Austell was just above the noise. And that was probably due to the dipole, feeder loss, local trees, low antenna. And of course, I'd snipped some wire off my 4 meter dipole to get the power supply working. So I'd sacrificed a bit of dipole, so it wasn't even totally resonant on 4. As the wind had dropped, I upped the height of the HF antenna and got back on PSK on 40 meters. I'd got another sked with G4RS, the Royal Signals people, on 40 meters on PSK 31. Didn't hear anything, but again, I was trying to work them from their site in Dorset, so I think again it was within the skip zone. So I switched over to FT8, and it was still very slow going. So I thought, fine, it's the weather's decent. I'll walk down to, there's a cafe, restaurant, bar place that I'd had lunch in a few days previously. I thought I'll go down there, have a nice meal, you know, treat myself. It was fully booked, even in April. So I walked back and settled for a cheese sandwich at home. It didn't sort of quite match my expectations, but still, never mind. And I finished off with a bit of FT8 on 80 meters, slow going. Friday morning, visibility was down to about 200 meters, no wind, so I thought the best thing to do is play radio. 80 meters was not good, so I tried 40, and I worked ZL4AS in New Zealand on first call on 40 meters. Now that's the first time I've ever worked New Zealand from anywhere, so I was really chuffed with that. I put myself on the worldwide, on the Flora and Fauna website again, and then I had this nutty Italian work me. 4 times in a succession he worked me, and he still kept calling me for a solid hour. I don't know, I really could not understand this guy. You know, I'd followed through, you know, I think this was FT8, and I'd followed through the absolute protocol. The only thing I can think is this was in the relatively early days of FT8, and I think he may not have been seeing that on some of the owners, he may only have been seeing G6MXL rather than G6MXL/P, and it may be that was confusing him. That's the only explanation I could think. So the mist lifted, but it was still a little breezy. Uploaded the logs from the previous day. Checked the weather forecast for wind and visibility. And one thing I found really good, I don't know about you, but sometimes I listen to the shipping forecast on Radio 4 Longwave. Well, one of the areas is Scilly. When you're actually sat on the Scilly Isles, suddenly these shipping forecasts suddenly become very relevant. You can relate to this because there's water all around you, and you're bang centre of this in this shipping forecast area. Anyway, weather forecast was good, no wind, good visibility. So I thought, fine, there's no need for me to pack up early, because what I didn't want to do was to have to pack up loads of stuff that was soaking wet for my return trip on Saturday morning. Anyway, there's my contact with ZL4AS on 40 meters. And as you'll see, the stroke P got truncated off my call for some of the overs. I don't think that happens anymore on the latest versions of FT8. Friday lunchtime, I started to pack up non-essential items. So, you know, the transverter, the 4 meter, 6 meter dipole, the coax, the extension of the coax, anything that I didn't need to actually carry on operating, I packed away. I went up the road and had a nice ham salad with some German wine, came back, switched on 30 meters with FT8 and had plenty of European contacts. In the afternoon, I wandered up to the cafe again and had my last apple strudel with ice cream and coffee. Very, very nice lady there. She's German herself, and very, very nice. Highly recommend. In the evening, I was back on 30 meters. I was forced to move up the band a bit to get a clear working frequency. What was very clear was that I was getting plenty of contacts as soon as people turned on their radios after they'd had a week at work. And I've noticed this before. It sometimes, you know, as sort of Friday evening, sort of 5, 6, 7 o'clock time, as the Europeans and then us get home, activity tends to pick up a bit. And by that time I was approaching 500 contacts. So I thought, right, I'm going to keep going. I want to at least break the 500 contact, 500 QSO barrier. So I kept plugging away, and just after 8 o'clock I'd got 502 in the log, and I thought, fine, I'm going to stop now. I made the 500, I've got a couple to spare, so that's good. It was still daylight and it was dry, so I thought, I'm going to get the antenna down whilst it's dry, it's windless, and I can see what I'm doing. So basically by 9 o'clock British summertime, I'd got the station dismantled and packed. Now during the week, I think the most difficult QSO was with a foundation guy on Shetland. He was running 10 watts to a G5 RV, and he was incredibly weak. He was minus 24 dB. It took us 10 minutes to exchange reports. But you know, I really wanted to make, you know, to make a go of it, and we completed okay. And he confirmed on Logbook of the World, and I thought, yeah, I was quite chuffed with that one. It's nice that, you know, he wanted to work me, and we were able to exchange reports. It was worth the struggle. Okay, some sort of more general things. Logs. I started paper logging, but switched to computer logging. And what I tended to do was to upload my logs once a day, usually breakfast time-ish, to Logbook of the World, EQSL, Clublog, and QRZ.com. When I got home, I also uploaded the logs to QRZCQ.com. The Ham Radio Today log thing, it needs an extra field to identify that I wasn't G6MXL but G6MXL/P, so I had to sort of deal with that. And I also uploaded to the WWFF, the Flora and Fauna Administrator. So this is my analysis of QSOs by band and mode. And as you can see, FT8 was by far the main mode. You know, from my point of view, it was sort of, this was a new, exciting mode that I was still thinking, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And it meant that I could make plenty of QSOs on 30 meters. So as you can see, 30 and 40 meters were my two main bands, and FT8 and PSK were my two main modes. In terms of DXCC entities, I ended up with 55. I worked 6 continents. Yeah, I was quite happy with that. You know, it wasn't, you know, if you compare it with a proper DXpedition, you know, I'd be laughed out of court. But for a first DXpedition, I was quite pleased. And at the end of the day, there's 172 stations had got India November 69 in the ARRL grids chase. Now, they wouldn't have got any of those if it wasn't for my operation. Later in the year, another station went down and operated, but at that stage, every one of those 172 were my operation. So I felt quite chuffed with that. There was some big guns in there and some quite small fry as well. So it was a nice sort of spread of stations. So lessons learned and issues. The research I did beforehand paid off. There were no major issues. I did do a rehearsal. I actually assembled the whole station in the back, on the back lawn. But I didn't really allow quite enough time to deal with the issues that arose. I'll show you a picture in a minute, but I did have an issue with the mic input on the FT857. We'll come on to that in a moment. And if weight is a limitation, and it certainly was for me, weigh everything, bar none. It's only when you weigh things you realise just how heavy they are, and you sort of question yourself, do I really need to be taking that? Do I really need to be taking that? Now, I could very easily taken 500 grams or a kilo's worth of tools. I didn't have a soldering iron, didn't have solder, those are the sorts of things that I could very easily have sort of thrown in and bumped the weight up. It's good to have access to your transceiver's instruction manual, especially if it's a transceiver you're not used to. I downloaded the manual off the internet and kept it on the laptop. With the benefit of hindsight, the one thing I would have done very differently is I would have publicized the activity more. You know, I think I put it on the DX cluster a couple of times, but you know, there was no advanced publicity on any of the sort of normal channels, and that is the one thing I would do differently without a shadow of a doubt. The Swiss Army tool, I think, is an excellent minimum toolkit. It got me out of a hole. Without it, after the first night, I would have had to have gone into town, bought tools. Then I'd been having, you know, a lot of weight to deal with. It turned out to be an absolute godsend. If you're going to be uploading logs to Logbook of the World and all these types of things, make sure you've got all the necessary call signs and routes set up in advance. Don't upload logs when you're tired. I tried it one evening and my finger slipped and I had to sort of go through and delete a whole, you know, a day's worth of contacts. I think that was EQSL, but whatever. Don't do it when you're tired. And because weight was such an issue, I just couldn't afford to take unnecessary equipment just in case. On data modes, the one thing I discovered was that it was, on many occasions, I was actually competing with other stations that, whilst I couldn't hear them, stations in between the two of us could hear them. And in the end, I found it worked a lot better if I just moved up the band and be ready for people coming home from work. That was often a very good time to be on the air. Right, I said I'd mention the mic input on the FT857. The way a mic plugs into the FT857 is you slide off the front panel and there's a mic socket on the left-hand side, one of these push-in things, a bit like the plug you have on a network cable, computer network cable. And I was planning to use the ARRL adapter that I use at home, and it's the one I use with my FT817. However, the ARRL microphone adapter, the ARRL adapter, has a really long plastic boot on it. So long, in fact, and so stiff that it wouldn't let me slide the front panel back on. And I discovered this probably about a week before before I left home. I thought, oh dear, this is a bit of a problem. So I came up with two ways around it. One, the standard Yaesu mic lead I could use, and I could unplug that lead from the microphone itself at the microphone end and use a back-to-back connector which comes with the official ARRL adapter. So I was able to work around it that way. That worked well, and it's something to, you know, if I was to use an FT857 again, that's how I would do it. The other alternative is not to use the ARRL adapter, but Technifix do an adapter which has got a much smaller boot. So I used that on another trip subsequently with success. So that's a good alternative. There you can see the yellow one at the top is the official ARRL one, and as you can see, it extends the sleeving boot on it extends for more than the length of the plug itself, whereas the Technifix one has got a much smaller sleeve or boot. It's sort of less than the length of the plug. So, you know, a useful little thing to have in case I ever use an FT857 again. And I think there's one or two other Yaesu rigs that operate, you know, have a similar arrangement for their microphone. EMC issues. I mentioned earlier about these bedside lights. My RF activated these touch-operated bedside lights. It was unrelated to the frequency being used, and every time I spoke or I started transmitting data, the lights would come on. When I stopped keying, the lights would stay on. When I keyed up again, they'd come on a bit brighter, because it was at these light switches had an off and then 3 levels of brightness. Well, the solution I came up with was simply to unplug them. I did remember to plug them back in before I left. About a year, 18 months later, my neighbour, I had new neighbours at home, and they brought with them a house full of touch-operated lights. And I've had all sorts of problems. I have come up with a solution. Basically, all of the metal on the light, so the vertical bit and the base, are touch sensitive. And when you touch, it just nudges the frequency of an oscillator in a little black box inside them. And that triggers a change in the state from off to on dim, onto medium brightness, onto full brightness, to off again. However, these things, although they strictly speaking meet EMC standards, they are wide open to RF. I actually went out and bought one, and I've subsequently found that if I put a small RF choke between the metalwork in the lead that goes from the metalwork to the little black box that's got the electronics in it, I can kill that as a problem. I've proven that works at home on all bands from 40 meters up to 10 meters. But just that's the way I've found a solution. What I now need to do is convince my neighbour that that's a safe solution, because I've got to persuade him to let me modify all his lights. So my next task is to actually approach a local electrician and get them to conduct whatever tests they wish and certify that my solution is electrically safe. Because I don't think I want to be held liable for whatever might happen to my neighbour if I haven't had them certified by an independent party. This was the QRM I got. I mentioned one evening I packed up early because of the QRM, and you can see that sort of orange bit at the top of the screen and what it looks like on the bottom. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on these matters. All I know is that it sounded really loud, and there was nowhere I could go to get rid of it. Sometimes it only lasted a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes a lot longer. I didn't investigate the cause. I don't know whether it was an electric fence, maybe the fridge thermostat, I don't know. But there were certainly plenty of electric fences in the vicinity, so it could have been that, but your guess is as good as mine. I don't pretend to be an expert on these things. Okay, so enough of radio. I thought I'd finish by just showing you a few pictures of St Mary's. Just up the road there from where I was staying was a place called Bounce Khan Burial Chamber, and apparently it dates from at least 2000 years before Christ, so it's pretty old. Much closer to me was Telegraph Tower, and this is where Marconi heard wireless signals transmitted from Porthcurno near Land's End in 1898. Whilst it's got some antennas on the top, it rather looks to me as though it's some sort of luxurious pad of somebody, so certainly no invitation to go and visit or anything like that. As regards broadcast TV and radio, there's a separate TV and VHF FM radio relay on the islands. That covers all of the Isles of Scilly. At the time, there was no DAB transmitter serving the islands. I'm not sure whether that may have changed in the last 2 years. There's also a local radio station, Radio Scilly, and that operates from a nearby maritime and coastal agency mast. The community bus, it's £2 for a single journey clockwise. It doesn't go anti-clockwise. You just sort of get on wherever you want to go, give them £2, and he gets really grumpy if he's got to give you change. And you sit there and get off when you get to where you want to get off. Don't take any notice of that number 48. It's the only bus on the island. It's seen better days. But it's quite handy. I used it on a couple of 3 occasions to get into town when it was raining. Alternatively, you can get a taxi. It's sort of £5 a journey, just about anywhere on the island. I noticed quite a few people had rented golf buggies, the little buggies you get on golf courses. I didn't research those. And to be honest, you can get to just about anywhere on St Mary's in about an hour if you're prepared to walk. There are daffodil fields. Even in mid-April, some of the daffodils hadn't been harvested. Now, I'd never seen commercially grown daffodils before, and it's quite an impressive sight to see. This is Hugh-town. It's the only large settlement on St Mary's. It has a number of shops and a number of banks, and it has an ATM. In terms of food shops, there is a co-op, and there's sort of 1 or 2 little sort of delicatessen type shops. That's it. There was a hardware shop, I think, somewhere, but you certainly haven't got a huge variety of shops. There's a small industrial estate that I didn't bother to explore, and there's something they call a hospital, but with only 1,600 odd population, I can't imagine it's very sophisticated, and I doubt if they could do much to tackle coronavirus if they had if they had many people go down with it. So it comes now to thanking. Well, I should thank Paul Radio Society. They lent me the Yaesu FT857 that performed brilliantly, and I found the IPO or the attenuator essential on 80 and 40 meters, which I think is pretty common for most transceivers. Apart from the main switch, the Watson PowerMic PSU performed well. I replaced the switch. I've actually bought one for my future trips. It is a little bit noisy because it's a switch mode power supply, but it's pretty light, and it has the advantage of having both a voltage and a current meter. Now, when you haven't got any other test equipment, to see that you are the voltage and seeing you're drawing current, it's quite a useful way of knowing that effectively, if it's drawing that much current, I must be getting out. It's crude, but it's the best measure I had. I should thank Paul Wallman G0ODP for just prompting the question about tools, what you're going to do. And also to thank Larry at the club and Alan for trying to set up SCEDs. Alan was kind enough to set me up the SCED with G4RS, the Royal Signals SCED. So that was much appreciated. And that's it. Very, very happy to take questions. Let me just see what I have to do now.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Colin. Thank you indeed for the detail of that. I guess it's portable operation with a vengeance, isn't it, really, what you talked about there. So I'm going to chuck it open. Who's got a question or contribution to put to Colin, or any ideas for any DXpeditions that people have now been inspired to go and do? Darren. How do I mute?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the unmute button. Yeah, good evening, and thanks for an interesting talk. Slightly light-hearted. You reminded me of one or two trips I've had abroad. I do remember going to Australia, VK land, and like you say, walking to the airport, I think I looked like a Michelin man. I left home weighing about 70 kilos. By the time I got to the airport, I weighed about 100 kilos with the amount of extra clothing I had on. Also, I had so many radio bits and pieces stuffed in various pockets. I think I had an 817 over the shoulder. It's really quite amazing what the airports try and put you through, but also what they will let you get away with. They had no interest whatsoever in what they were wearing around the body. All they were interested in what the suitcase weighed. And once you get through security, etc., you can fill your boots in the airport. They don't care what you buy. Just don't put it in hand luggage. They'll give you carrier bags. You can buy mouthwash, toothpaste, champagne, you name it. You could end up walking out with 50 kilos. They don't care. So that's one thing to bear in mind there. But yeah, very interesting talk, and thanks very much.
Cheers, Darren. Thank you very much. Richard.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks very much indeed. Very, very interesting that. Roughly, what did it cost, the whole trip? Just in rough figures.
I'm trying to remember. I think the accommodation was, I'm inclined to say 500-ish quid. And the flights, I'm not sure, but I'm inclined to think about 150. They weren't cheap. And then there was just train fares and food.
Yeah, very interesting. What's the, if you'd have paid for it, what's the maximum weight that you could have taken on? I've flown on those Islanders and they're not very big. What's the maximum weight you could have perhaps taken?
The absolute maximum I could have taken would have been 20 kilos of check-in and 3 kilos of hand luggage.
Right,
So
okay.
total of 23 kilos.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much indeed.
The only, if I wanted to go over that, I'd have been looking at, I would have been forced to go by ferry.
Yeah, and you'd have probably lost about 3 stone on the journey.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Really interesting that.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
The other thing, Richard, that I'm sure you found is very, very important. If you take a lot of wires and bits and pieces, make sure you put it in the wife's hand luggage, not yours.
I took my gear through Alicante Airport and they made me lift every single item out of my bag. The radio, the ATU, the power supply, and I had to go through the gate and back each time. And Shirley was stood there and you could see the smoke. She said, "You told me it would be all right." There's about 250 people behind me tapping, thinking, who's this silly beggar with all this electronic gear that's going to blow us all up? Good fun.
I perhaps should just mention that coming back from the Isles of Scilly, there was absolutely zero security. No X-raying, no nothing.
Okay, I can well imagine that.
I've experienced the same. Going out's one thing, coming back's an absolute doddle. It just makes you think sometimes.
Yeah. To be fair, you can't source anything dangerous there. So unless it had gone via ferry, you can't, that's the only way you could get something dodgy to bring back.
Okay, thank you, Darren, Richard. Right, anyone else got a question or point to Colin? Yeah, David, M0TGC.
Colin, thanks very much. Very interesting chat. I wonder, did you get any reaction from the locals? Any positive comments or negative comments or anything at all?
I didn't encounter any locals apart from the lady who owned the chalet. In terms of my operating, I did stop at one point for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so because some guy was cutting the grass out the front, and I just sort of was just a little bit worried in case he happened to do something and knock the antenna or anything. So I thought, well, I'll just stop whilst he does that. But other than that, it's where I was, because I wasn't in the town, I didn't encounter any locals in terms of my operating.
Right. Second question, or actually comment. I've had experience of these touch sensitive lights, and I came across a solution where you actually wrap the mains lead into the light around a ferrite ring, 10 in and 10 out, etc. And that is a little bit less invasive than actually taking the thing apart and putting a choke in the middle of it. Just a comment, really.
Yeah, I've tried that, and with the particular models that my neighbour has, that's not made a dent whatsoever.
It's probably a good job that the other chalet, the semi-detached chalet, wasn't occupied at the same time in that case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you, David. Right, anyone else with a question to Colin? Shall I get everyone on the screen? Yeah, Roger.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Colin. That was really interesting. Couple of sort of observations really. I presume there's no car ferry, so you can't sort of take you're unlimited amount anyway wherever you go. But if you're flying, it's almost the cost you quote there. It's almost cheaper to buy everything when you get there. Just go with no clothes. Just buy yourself a new set when you get there. it sounds like it would be potentially cheaper if you're going for anything more than a few days. And I wondered if you'd considered shipping in advance. Would that be a possibility to ship gear, get TNT, FedEx, whatever, send a bunch of gear over there in advance and have it shipped there and back? Would that be more cost effective?
I think I certainly didn't explore that. I think if I was sort of a big DXpedition, it would be worth considering something like that. The ferry does take cargo, and they do take, I think, they will crane a vehicle on and off, so you can, if you live on the Isles of Scilly, you can buy yourself a car and have it delivered. But to be honest, I really wasn't in the sort of the frame of mind of taking a lot of heavyweight gear. I've got nothing that would. I haven't got a linear. I'm not into beams and things like that. So all my antennas at home are wire dipoles of one sort or another. So if I'd been into, if I was going to do 6 meters and 4 meters seriously with sort of a Yagi or something like that, yes, I think I would have considered possibly shipping them or something like that. But excuse me, it was not something that I gave any serious consideration to.
Thanks. It was interesting. I mean, what you did there with the lightweight gear, that's incredible. I take usually hand baggage, and it weighs nearly 10 kilos hand baggage. So God knows how you went with such a little bag kit. It's incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, the key is weighing everything.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Right, anyone else with a question or points? Colin, yeah, David.
Hi, has it come off? Yeah. Hi, thanks, Nick. Thanks for muting me. Thanks for the presentation there, Colin. I do some bits and pieces of portable stuff. You mentioned about more comments rather than anything else. You mentioned about not taking any excessive weight, yet you look to have taken 2 microphones. Something else was the cost of the cottages. They must have gone up an awful lot since you were there. As, while the talk was on another window, I opened it up, and it's £1,000 for a week now. Well, 980.
Wow. I think I was able to get a good deal because I think I was the first person there that season. So, and this, bear in mind, this was sort of beginning of April, so it was sort of almost out of season. So I think I got a good deal that way, and there was only the one person. There was only just me staying, so they didn't have to wash the bedding for 2 bedrooms. It was only 1 bed's worth of washing to do and things like that.
Okay, I mean, going as a group, the accommodation would be the same cost, and you could split the equipment, couldn't you? So that would give you maybe more options.
Oh, absolutely. If you did it as a group, you could cut your costs quite significantly, although you've still got your travel costs.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks again for the talk. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Anyone else with a question or point to Colin? Scroll between the screens. No one's waving at me. Darren again. Yeah, go on.
Yes, just one more thing. I own a Flex 3000 radio, which weighs very, very little. Has a built-in ATU and will do 100 watts. Yet very, very few DXpeditions seem to run them. I can see the one downside in it does use lots of computer space. But I just wonder why it doesn't get considered very often.
I don't know, is the honest answer. I've never used a software-defined radio, so it would have been a sort of a big learning curve for me. And I'm not sure how I would have been able to get hold of one had I even considered it. I don't know of anybody who's, I tell a lie, I know one person who's got one, but I doubt if I would have been able to talk them into lending me, letting me borrow it. So it would have been, it would have been something that would have been quite different. It would have been, I think, a bit too risky from my perspective. Strange radio, strange software, not able to get hold of one readily. It sort of didn't feel as though that would be a good way for me on this instance.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. As I say, I do have one, and I haven't yet used it in a portable location. I have tried to use it recently contest-wise, but the biggest problem then is you're using a screen for the radio and then a screen for the login, and no matter what you do, the mouse always seems to be on the wrong bit of the screen. So that is the biggest downfall, but it is so light and the performance is so good in comparison to some of the portable radios out there. So perhaps that's the biggest downfall.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, the weight and the availability were the sort of the two criteria. Weight predominantly, but the availability was a second consideration. And when the FT85, when I'd got the option of borrowing the 857 from the club, and it was the lightest 100 watt HF transceiver that I'd identified, it seemed a pretty obvious choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I've used the 857, the 897 personally. So yeah, I think that's the way I would go down that route. In all honesty, even though I have played around with the Flex radios. Thank you. Pleasure.
Incidentally, Darren, I was just looking it up. The Flex 3000 weighs just over 4 kilograms. So it's a little bit heavier than the 857.
Wow, you amazed me there, because I've got one of those. I've had the other radio as well, and I would have said the 3000 was way less.
No, that's the 3000. Yeah, I've got it on the screen here on rig reference.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Is it because it's a big box and so it's low?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Almost
its weight might be more, but the mass is less.
There's nothing inside it. Yeah.
I remember that science lesson.
Okie dokie. Right. Anyone else a question to Colin? No. If not, I'd like to first of all thanks Colin very much indeed for. I know you've been a visitor at some of our meetings, but offering to give us your talk on your trip to the Isles of Scilly, and perhaps all the club members could do as people start to do, just show their thanks to Colin for his talk tonight. Thank you very much appreciated.
Thanks, gents.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Colin. Right, before we close the meeting, and then I'll just shut it down and let people chat between themselves, I don't know if anyone else has spotted, but the Radio Society of Great Britain have caught up with us. And they're going to be organising fortnightly webinars, and the first one is going to be next Monday, the 15th, at 8 o'clock, and it's going to be a talk on the Raspberry Pi in amateur radio, and the second one, a fortnight afterwards, has got Steve, who came and spoke to us on HF propagation G0KYA. And he's giving a talk on antennas for small gardens. So they're the first two. If you have a look at the RSGB website, you'll find and just type in, if you can't find it, in the search box webinars, and it will take you to the link. They haven't posted up the webinar details where you log into it on, but they've actually put those on. So they've got 4 meetings set up, and they've put those in the diary. Okay.
What platform are they using, Nick?
Sorry?
What platform are they using?
It doesn't say on the website which platform they're going to use.
Right.
There is a Zoom webinar platform, so it could be that. It could be another one, but I don't know. but yeah, I was looking for something on the RSGB site, something else, and came across it, and it's a bit of a shame the RSGB don't do what the ARRL that I'm a member of do a fantastic newsletter regularly with all kinds of information in it, and the RSGB don't seem to do that to its members. So it's by accident you go and look at their website and find things that's buried away on there that someone really ought to draw your attention to prompt you, in my view.
And that, Nick.
Yeah, go on, Gerard.
Just to say, they do send out, if you ask them, if you log on for it, the sort of RSGB news that comes out on a Sunday morning on a broadcast, but they send you that as an email, and that often has fairly up-to-the-minute things on.
It does, but what the RSGB news doesn't have is the kind of updates on their website of new bits they've added to it, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, right, well, look, thanks everybody. It's been a great evening again, and I've really enjoyed it. Just my warning again to particularly Denby Dale Club members who want to get in next week, if you can log on by 7:20, we'll definitely guarantee getting you in. If you're after 7:20, then we'll start to let everyone else in, particularly all our friends here tonight who've been to loads of